My parents skipped my graduation, calling my sleepless nights pointless. They chose a cosmetic launch party instead, leaving me alone in a sea of celebrating families. But days later, a $35 billion company called offering $3 million for an algorithm I built in my bedroom, along with a vice president title. Suddenly, my mother called, demanding an emergency family meeting to force me to sign away my financial freedom. I showed up, but I did not bring my checkbook. I brought a file that would destroy their perfect lives. I am Valerie, 33 years old, and my entire life was defined by the four empty folding chairs in the third row of the university auditorium. As the commencement speaker congratulated the graduating Master of Business Administration class, the cheers of proud parents echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I sat perfectly still, clutching my expensive piece of paper, staring at the empty spaces where my family was supposed to be. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch the people who should love you most choose someone else over you. The vibration of my phone in my graduation gown pocket broke my focus. It was a text message from my mother, Brenda. "We are at Chelsea's cosmetic launch. The venue is gorgeous and the press is everywhere. Your ceremony is pointless anyway, since you just push papers in a cubicle. Catch an Uber home. I am busy tonight." I did not cry. I had stopped crying over my mother's casual cruelty years ago. I simply locked my phone and joined the procession out of the hall. The air outside was thick with the suffocating humidity of early summer. While my classmates hugged their cheering relatives and posed for photographs with massive bouquets of flowers, I walked alone toward the overflow parking lot, where my beat-up sedan was parked. I slid into the driver's seat, the torn upholstery scratching against my bare legs. As I waited for the ancient air conditioning to kick in, I opened my phone again. The screen illuminated a newly posted video on social media from my brother-in-law, Marcus. Marcus is an investment broker, a charismatic African-American man who prides himself on his designer suits and high-end watches. He had married my younger sister Chelsea 3 years ago, immediately adopting my parents' habit of treating me like an invisible, incompetent servant. The video showed Marcus standing next to a gleaming, brand-new luxury sports car. His arm was wrapped tightly around Chelsea, who was posing flawlessly in a custom silk dress. "Proud of my Queen Chelsea for securing her second Porsche," Marcus had written across the screen. "Thanks to the in-laws for the 50% down payment. We are celebrating big tonight." I stared at the screen, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Chelsea's luxury cosmetic brand had been bleeding money for months, a fact she desperately tried to hide behind expensive marketing events and constant social media bragging. Yet my parents, Gregory and Brenda, had just handed her tens of thousands of dollars for a sports car. They were draining their own retirement accounts to fund her delusions of grandeur, desperately clinging to the image of having a wealthy, successful daughter. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a stack of paper. It was my final student loan statement. I had paid it off completely just 2 weeks ago, working grueling 60-hour weeks as a data analyst, taking on freelance coding projects at night, and skipping meals to save every possible dollar. I had asked my parents for a small loan during my first semester when my rent was unexpectedly raised. My father had laughed in my face, telling me that real adults do not beg for handouts. Yet here he was buying his golden child a second luxury vehicle. I tossed the statement onto the passenger seat, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I was not going to let their toxic favoritism break me today. I had spent 5 years sacrificing my sleep, my social life, and my sanity to build something real. I had developed a predictive risk assessment algorithm, an artificial intelligence model designed to foresee catastrophic financial market shifts before they happened. I had poured every ounce of my frustration and intellect into that code, treating it as my only ticket out of the suffocating shadow of my family. Suddenly, my phone rang. The caller identification showed a New York area code. I cleared my throat, pushing the disappointment down, and answered professionally. "Is this Valerie?" The voice on the other end was deep and authoritative. Speaking, I replied, "Valerie, this is Victor. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Global." My breath caught in my throat. Apex Global was a $35 billion financial conglomerate. They were the biggest player in the industry, the kind of company that dictated market trends globally. I had sent a limited demonstration of my algorithm to their tech acquisition department 3 months ago, hoping for a low-level engineering interview. I never expected the chief executive officer to call me personally. We ran your predictive risk algorithm through our historical stress tests. Victor continued, his tone shifting from formal to intensely serious. It is an absolute masterpiece. Our entire quantitative team has been trying to crack this exact predictive model for 3 years, and you built it alone. Yes, sir. I managed to say, my voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. We are not going to insult you with an engineering position, Victor said. We want to buy the intellectual property outright. We are offering $3 million for the code, plus an immediate spot on our executive board as vice president. Can you fly to New York? I smiled. Yes. My name is Valerie, and the jet Apex Global sent for me was a stark contrast to my peeling sedan. Within 24 hours, I sat in Victor's Manhattan office, signing a contract, transferring the rights to my predictive algorithm for $3 million. The ink was barely dry when Human Resources handed me my gold corporate card and my new title as Vice President of Risk Architecture. My bank account suddenly held more wealth than my parents accumulated in their entire lifetimes. I flew back to my modest apartment on Sunday evening, ready to pack and relocate to New York. I barely unlocked my door when my phone rang. The caller identification flashed my mother's name. I answered, expecting an apology for skipping my graduation. Instead, Brenda was frantic. You need to come to the house immediately, she ordered. We have a family emergency and you need to be here right now. Drop whatever paperwork you are doing and get over here. I did not ask questions. I knew the tone perfectly well. It was the same voice she used when Chelsea wrecked her first car and my parents demanded I take the blame. I changed into a tailored blazer I bought in New York and grabbed the sleek metallic folder I compiled during my flight. I had a feeling I would need it tonight. The drive to my parents' house took 40 minutes. Chelsea's Porsche was gleaming in the driveway. I walked through the front door without knocking, sensing the toxic tension. The living room looked like a staged theater production of a tragedy. Chelsea was curled on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, producing theatrical sobs with no tears. My mother hovered over her, stroking her hair and glaring as if my presence was an insult. My father, Gregory, stood rigidly by the stone fireplace, his face bright red with rage and panic. Standing directly behind Chelsea, acting as her loyal protector, was Marcus. He wore a sharp designer suit, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, looking down his nose at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Nobody offered me a seat. Nobody asked how my graduation went. Gregory did not waste a single second. He marched over to the glass coffee table and threw down a thick stack of legal documents. The heavy thud echoed in the silent room. Chelsea's business had a minor hiccup, Gregory barked, pointing a trembling finger at the scattered papers. One of her suppliers is being unreasonable about a delayed payment. The bank is threatening to put a lien on her warehouse, which is completely ridiculous considering her luxury brand is about to go global. She just needs a temporary cosigner for a bridge loan to smooth things out. You have a stable paycheck from whatever data entry job you do. Sign this immediately so they do not take her property away. It was a commercial loan agreement for a massive sum requiring the cosigner to pledge personal assets as collateral. I looked back up at my father, keeping my expression neutral. You want me to co-sign a loan for Chelsea's failing cosmetics company? I stated calmly. It is not failing, Brenda shrieked from the sofa, her hands fluttering defensively. It is a cash flow issue. You would not understand because you have no ambition. You just sit in a cubicle taking orders. Chelsea is a visionary. Marcus scoffed loudly, stepping forward to defend his supposedly brilliant wife. He uncrossed his arms and gave me a condescending smile. Come on, Val. Do not be like this tonight. Chelsea is actually creating jobs and building an empire, while you are just pushing papers around for a meager salary. Be a good big sister for once in your life. Support her vision instead of being bitter and jealous of her success. You have no real financial liabilities anyway. You live in a cheap apartment and drive a junk car. The least you can do is leverage your clean credit score to help your sister secure her warehouse. It is basic family loyalty. I stared silently at Marcus for a long moment. He was so arrogant, completely blind to the horrific reality of who he had married. He honestly believed Chelsea was a thriving business owner. He had no idea he was proudly standing on the deck of a sinking ship. I am not signing anything, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. My credit score is not a safety net for Chelsea's financial incompetence. Gregory's face shifted from red to a purple. How dare you speak to your sister that way? He roared, stepping toward me with his fists clenched. You owe this family everything. We let you live under our roof during college. We put a roof over your head while you wasted electricity on your useless coding projects. You owe us this signature right now. I did not back away an inch. I paid you rent every single month I lived here. I fired back, meeting his furious gaze without blinking. I paid for my own tuition by working 2 jobs while you fully funded Chelsea's useless degree and her lavish lifestyle. I owe you absolutely nothing. Brenda gasped, loudly clutching her chest. You ungrateful little girl, she spat. You are actually willing to watch your own sister lose her warehouse out of pure spite. I slowly unclasped my leather bag. I reached inside and pulled out the sleek metallic folder I had prepared. I held it up, letting the polished surface catch the bright light from the chandelier above us. I am not signing a single page, I said, shifting my gaze directly to my arrogant brother-in-law. In fact, before anyone talks about minor hiccups or business empires, I think Marcus should look at this first. I slid the metal folder across the glass coffee table, right to where Marcus was standing. Marcus stood motionless, the legal documents trembling in his hand. Every line of the audit proved that the equity he thought he was building in his marriage was actually a bonfire of debt. He looked at the bank statements, then back at Chelsea, his expression shifting from arrogance to a terrifying, quiet fury. Chelsea did not even try to hide it anymore. She stopped crying, her face turning into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She lunged for the folder, but Marcus pulled it back, his eyes fixed on the final page where his own digital signature had been faked. Brenda shrieked, the sound sharp enough to shatter the delicate china displayed on the sideboard. You miserable, vindictive child, she yelled, taking a step toward me, with her hand raised as if she were still dealing with a disobedient teenager. You have always hated your sister for being the center of attention. You dug up this trash to hurt her because you know she is the one who carries our family legacy. You are trying to sabotage her marriage to satisfy your own sick jealousy. I did not flinch. I just adjusted the lapel of my blazer and looked at my father, who was still standing by the fireplace, his face turning an alarming shade of beet red. Dad, I am not trying to sabotage anything. I am simply presenting the reality of the situation. You wanted me to co-sign that loan, which would have made me legally liable for those debts. I am simply showing you why the bank denied the initial request. They knew the business was insolvent, and I am not going to throw my future into a bottomless pit of Chelsea's vanity projects. Marcus finally found his voice, though it was low and shaking with rage. Chelsea! He said, his voice barely audible, but vibrating with the intensity of his betrayal. You told me those investment accounts were untouchable. You said they were growing for our future. You told me we were safe. Chelsea shrank back, her fake sobs replaced by a frantic scramble for excuses. It was just a bridge loan, Marcus. It was supposed to be a sure thing. The market is just being difficult. I was going to pay it back before you even noticed. I left them to their implosion. I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floors. Behind me, the shouting match between Marcus and Chelsea escalated into a full-blown war of words. Brenda started weeping, not because of the debt, but because the neighbors might hear the shouting and tarnish their perfect image. Gregory was still trying to shout me down, his voice echoing through the foyer, demanding I come back and finish this conversation like a respectful daughter. I did not stop. The crisp evening air hit me the moment I stepped outside, a sharp contrast to the suffocating environment I had just escaped. My sedan looked even more pathetic parked next to Chelsea's financed sports car, but it did not matter anymore. Tomorrow I would be taking a town car to the airport, flying first class to New York, and never stepping foot in this house again. I had planned this moment for years, imagining the weight lifting off my shoulders, and the reality was sweeter than the fantasy. I had spent my life playing by their rules, sacrificing my potential to maintain their comfort only to be discarded when I no longer served their convenience. I drove back to my apartment, the city lights reflecting in my rearview mirror. My phone lit up with dozens of notifications. Messages from Brenda frantic and threatening. Texts from Gregory demanding I call him back before he involved the police for theft of family secrets. I read them all, a cold smile on my lips. They were terrified. They had spent my entire upbringing convincing me that I was a secondary character in their lives, a background extra who existed only to support Chelsea's lead role. Now that power dynamic had been obliterated. I spent the rest of the night finalizing my relocation details. I had already put in my notice for my old analyst role, which had become increasingly hostile as I moved up in the industry. My former boss had tried to sabotage my final weeks, sensing my departure meant losing his most reliable employee, but I had ignored his petty power plays. He had no idea I was about to join the leadership team at Apex Global, a position that would effectively render his opinion meaningless in the long run. The next morning, I woke up feeling a profound, terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. My apartment, which had once felt like a temporary waiting room for a better life, now just felt like a box I was ready to leave. I had minimal possessions. Most of my energy for the last 5 years had gone into my algorithm and my savings. I packed my laptop, my external hard drives, and a few personal items, leaving the rest for the donation bin. I did not want to carry any baggage, emotional or physical, into my new life in Manhattan. I arrived at the airport early. As I walked through the terminal, I noticed a headline on a newsstand. A local business profile was running a feature on rising stars of the financial industry. I scanned the page and saw my own name in bold print. I had participated in the interview months ago, never imagining how things would unfold. I bought a copy not to show my family, but as a reminder to myself of where I had started. I was no longer the girl in the pale blue bedroom waiting for permission to exist. I was a vice president at the most powerful firm in the world. My flight to New York was smooth. I watched the sprawling landscape of Connecticut disappear beneath the clouds, feeling the distance between me and my past increasing with every mile. I had a new apartment waiting near Central Park, a luxury space that was currently empty, ready for me to define it on my own terms. My phone remained silent. I had blocked the entire family from my digital life before boarding the plane. They could scream into the void of my voicemail for as long as they liked, but their voices would never again penetrate my sanctuary. As the plane began its descent into the concrete jungle of Manhattan, I opened my laptop to review the project briefs Victor had sent over. My first task as VP was to implement my risk model across their high-frequency trading desk. It was an enormous responsibility, the kind that would define the rest of my career, but I felt ready. The training I had received at home, the constant need to anticipate my parents' reactions, the necessity of navigating their unpredictable moods, the discipline of hiding my true potential had ironically prepared me for the cutthroat world of international finance. I stepped off the plane, inhaling the chaotic electric energy of the city. I was Valerie, and this was finally my life. I knew there would be challenges ahead. My family was not the type to give up easily. They were ego-driven, entitled, and entirely lacking in self-awareness. But for the first time, the playing field was level. I had the resources, the professional backing, and the cold, hard logic of my algorithm to shield me. They had always treated me like a pawn in their game of social chess, assuming I would always be there to pick up the pieces when they made a bad move. They had forgotten that pawns can reach the other side of the board and become queens. I was ready to see what they would do when they realized the game had changed. By Monday morning, the suffocating atmosphere of my family home felt like a lifetime ago. I was standing in my new luxury corner office in Manhattan, Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline, a sharp contrast to the cramped windowless cubicle I had occupied just a week earlier. The space was sleek, modern, and utterly silent. There was no screaming, no belittling, no constant demands to sacrifice my sanity for Chelsea. I placed my hands on the polished mahogany desk, breathing in the scent of fresh leather and success. I had finally made it. I was vice president of risk architecture at Apex Global. My desk phone chimed, breaking the quiet. It was my executive assistant, Sarah. Ms. Wilson. I apologize for the interruption, Sarah said, sounding slightly confused. There is a gentleman here at the reception desk, insisting he needs to speak with you immediately. He says he is a process server. Send him in, I replied, my voice perfectly steady. I knew my family would retaliate, but I had not expected them to move this quickly. A man in a wrinkled suit walked into my office a moment later. He verified my identity and handed me a thick manila envelope before turning and leaving without another word. I sat down in my tall leather chair and sliced the envelope open. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter accompanied by a lawsuit filed in the state of Connecticut. The plaintiff was Gregory Wilson, my father. I read through the legal jargon, my eyebrows raising higher with every paragraph. In a shocking display of narcissistic entitlement, my father was officially claiming that the family was legally entitled to 50% of my $3 million intellectual property payout. His justification was both hilarious and infuriating. The document claimed that because I had been living under his roof 5 years ago, when I initially began writing the base code for my predictive risk algorithm, the software was partially a product of family resources. The letter demanded an immediate freeze on all my financial assets until a settlement could be reached, threatening to tie me up in litigation for years if I refused to comply. It was gaslighting elevated to a legal strategy. They genuinely believed that by throwing a scary-looking document at me, I would fold just like I had always been expected to do when they demanded submission. They thought the threat of losing my money would send me running back to them begging for forgiveness and offering to pay Chelsea's massive debts to make the lawsuit disappear. I did not panic. I did not cry. I picked up my cell phone and dialed my father's number. I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted him entirely on the record. He answered on the second ring. His voice dripped with arrogant satisfaction. Valerie? He said, his tone thick with mock sympathy. I assume you received the paperwork. It is unfortunate we had to take this route, but you left us no choice when you turned your back on your sister. We are just securing what rightfully belongs to the family. You are claiming ownership of my software, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm and level. We provided the foundation for your success, Gregory replied smoothly, leaning into his delusional narrative. You lived in our house. You ate our food. You used our resources while you developed that program. Therefore, the family is entitled to an equitable share of the profits. It is only fair, Valerie. You should have voluntarily offered it to help Chelsea. Now we have to do this the hard way. I let a short, sharp laugh escape my lips. Dad, 5 years ago, you smashed my laptop in the driveway because I refused to do Chelsea's laundry for her. You cornered me in the kitchen, dragged me outside, and threw my property onto the concrete. You explicitly called my coding a useless waste of electricity. You screamed that I was a failure who would never amount to anything. That is an exaggeration. Gregory snapped, his smooth facade cracking for a split second. You were being difficult and disrespectful to your mother. I was teaching you a lesson about family priorities. You destroyed the only tool I had to build my future. I continued, my voice gaining an icy edge. I bought my replacement laptop with my own money, working double shifts at my second job. I wrote every single line of that algorithm on a machine I purchased, and I still have the neighbor's Ring camera footage showing you throwing my property into the street. You did not foster my success. You actively tried to sabotage it. Gregory sneered into the receiver, completely unbothered by the reality of his own abuse. You used our Wi-Fi, he shot back, his voice dripping with condescension. You lived under my roof, which means I own a stake in whatever you produced under it. We will see you in court, Valerie. We will freeze every dime you have until you learn some respect. You are not as smart as you think you are. We will see about that, I replied softly and hung up the phone. I looked down at the ridiculous lawsuit on my desk. My father was used to bullying a scared, exhausted daughter who had no resources to fight back. He had no idea who he was dealing with anymore. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and walked out of my office. I forwarded the letter to the extremely ruthless corporate legal team at Apex Global. The Apex legal department did not just squash Gregory's frivolous lawsuit, they annihilated it. Within 48 hours, my father received a terrifyingly formal response outlining exactly how much it would cost him in countersuit damages if he pursued his delusional claim over my intellectual property. The threat of financial ruin silenced Gregory immediately. He withdrew the filing. I thought that would be the end of their desperate flailing, but I underestimated Marcus. Marcus was a man obsessed with appearances, and his appearance was currently that of a man drowning in his wife's hidden debt. When the bank finally put the lien on Chelsea's warehouse, Marcus realized he was going down with her. He needed a distraction. He needed a scapegoat to explain to his high society friends why his lavish lifestyle was suddenly imploding. So he decided to side with Chelsea and Gregory, launching a vicious, coordinated attack on my professional reputation. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing risk assessment portfolios when my phone began vibrating continuously with notifications. Marcus had taken to social media, unleashing a meticulously crafted smear campaign across LinkedIn and Facebook. His post was a masterpiece of corporate slander. It read with heavy dramatic flair, "It is deeply disappointing when family betrays family." My sister-in-law, Valerie Wilson, recently secured a vice president position at Apex Global by stealing family trade secrets. She took proprietary data and predictive models developed under our family's roof and claimed them as her own. Integrity matters in the financial sector, and it breaks my heart to see Apex Global tricked by a con artist. He tagged the official Apex corporate accounts on every platform, ensuring maximum visibility. He tagged financial news outlets, industry watchdogs, and recruiting agencies. He wanted to start a fire big enough to burn my career to the ground. Brenda and Chelsea were quick to fan the flames. Chelsea shared the post on her Facebook page, adding a long, tearful caption about how she had supported my coding hobby, only for me to steal her business strategies to build my algorithm. Brenda flooded the comments section, playing the ultimate victim. She wrote about how a mother's heart was broken by such a deceitful, greedy daughter who abandoned her struggling family the second she stole her way to the top. The posts gained traction with alarming speed. People loved a corporate scandal, especially one involving a newly minted female executive at a $35 billion conglomerate. My inbox filled with messages from confused colleagues. My assistant Sarah looked terrified when she brought me my morning coffee. Then the inevitable happened. The internal line on my desk rang. It was Victor's secretary informing me that the chief executive officer requested my presence in his office immediately. I walked down the long glass-walled corridor of the executive floor. The murmurs of analysts and directors faded as I passed. I knew what they were whispering about. In the corporate world, an accusation of intellectual property theft, even a baseless one, was a radioactive stain. It could end a career before an investigation even began. Victor was standing by his massive window when I entered. The head of public relations, a sharp woman named Elena, sat on the leather sofa. Next to her was the lead corporate counsel, a man whose resting expression was a scowl. Victor turned to face me. The screen of his massive desktop monitor was displaying Marcus's viral LinkedIn post. "Valerie," Victor said, his voice grave. "We have a massive public relations nightmare unfolding. This post is gaining thousands of impressions per hour. Financial blogs are already calling our press office for a comment. They are asking if Apex failed to properly vet the software we just purchased for $3 million. Elena leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "Accusations of stolen trade secrets are highly damaging," she said. "The board is demanding answers. We need to know exactly what your family is talking about. Are there any shared patents? Did you use any of their hardware or proprietary data to build this risk model?" They expected me to be terrified. They expected tears, panic, and desperate apologies. I felt absolutely none of those things. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. "May I use your computer, Victor?" I asked calmly. Victor blinked, surprised by my absolute lack of emotion, but he stepped aside and gestured to the keyboard. I walked around the massive desk and opened a new secure browser window. I did not waste time defending myself with words. I let the data speak for itself. I logged into my encrypted cloud server, utilizing a dual authentication bypass I had set up for emergencies. I navigated straight to the source code repository for my predictive algorithm. I pulled up the root directory and projected the master log onto the large presentation screen on the wall so everyone in the room could see it clearly. "This is the complete version history of the algorithm you purchased," I explained, pointing to the scrolling lines of code. "Every single keystroke, every edit, and every compilation is recorded here." I highlighted the earliest Git commits. I directed their attention to the metadata attached to the files. As you can see by these time-stamped encrypted commits, the base architecture of this software was initiated exactly 3 months after I moved out of my parents' house. I opened the hardware diagnostic logs attached to the code. Furthermore, you will see the MAC address and the IP address logged on every single entry. This code was written entirely on a custom-built machine I purchased myself, utilizing a secure network located at my personal apartment miles away from my family. I have the receipts for the hardware, and I have the digital footprint proving that not a single line of this code ever touched a network or a device owned by Gregory Chelsea or Marcus. There are no family trade secrets. They do not even know what a predictive algorithm is. The room fell dead silent as the executives stared at the undeniable hard-coded proof on the screen. The tension evaporated, replaced by a fierce, calculating energy. Victor let out a low whistle. "They are lying," he stated, shaking his head. "They are openly lying on a public forum to defame an executive of this firm." Elena stood up, her eyes flashing with professional, ruthless intent. "This is textbook defamation," she said. "It is libel, and it is actively harming the reputation of Apex Global. We will issue a devastating counterstatement immediately. We will bury that post under a mountain of facts." The corporate counsel was already pulling out his phone. "I will draft a lawsuit against this Marcus character for tortious interference and defamation. We will bankrupt him by Friday." I closed the browser and stepped away from the desk. I looked at the three of them, feeling a surge of pure power. I had spent my entire life letting other people fight my battles, hiding away to avoid conflict. Not today. "Stop!" I said, my voice cutting through their rapid-fire planning. "I appreciate the swift action, but do not send the lawyers yet. Do not issue a press release." Victor frowned, looking at me with deep confusion. "Valerie, we cannot just let them drag your name through the mud. We have to respond. We will respond," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "But a press release is too easy. A lawsuit is too quiet. They want attention. They want to be seen as the wealthy, victimized elite. Let me handle them. I want to invite them to our annual leadership gala." Victor stared at me, a slow, predatory grin replacing his initial shock. Elena, the head of public relations, leaned back into the leather sofa and crossed her arms, her eyes shining with professional approval. "A public execution," she murmured softly. "I like it." The corporate counsel merely nodded his fingers, flying across his phone screen to halt the immediate lawsuit filings he had been drafting. I explained my strategy to them. I did not just want my family silenced with a quiet settlement or a gag order. I wanted them fully exposed, surrounded by the exact echelon of wealth, power, and prestige they had spent their entire lives pretending to belong to. I wanted their own towering delusion to be the instrument of their undoing. But first we needed to set the trap. The Apex legal department did not completely hold their fire. They simply changed their ammunition. Within 48 hours of Marcus posting his viral smear campaign, a specialized courier arrived at my parents' house and at Marcus's downtown brokerage firm simultaneously. They did not receive a standard polite cease and desist. They received a blistering 70-page draft of a countersuit crafted by lawyers who billed thousands of dollars an hour. The charges were terrifying: defamation, extortion, tortious interference, and corporate sabotage. The legal document systematically dismantled their lies, attaching the encrypted timestamp logs of my algorithm and the MAC address of the laptop I had purchased myself. But the true killing blow was directed entirely at Marcus. Apex Global's attorneys explicitly stated their intent to subpoena his brokerage firm, threatening to drag his employers into a highly publicized, multi-million-dollar liability suit for allowing an employee to utilize their corporate network to conduct targeted defamation against a rival financial institution. The letter made it explicitly clear that Apex would not stop until Marcus was barred from trading and financially ruined. The reaction was instantaneous. I watched from my office monitor as Marcus's LinkedIn posts vanished into thin air. Chelsea's tearful Facebook diatribes were deleted so quickly it was as if they had never existed. The sudden digital silence from their end was deafening. I could vividly imagine the chaotic scene unfolding at my parents' house. Gregory pacing the living room, his face purple with high blood pressure, while Marcus frantically called his own meager legal contacts, only to be told that fighting a $35 billion conglomerate would result in personal bankruptcy before the case even saw a courtroom. They were terrified, backed into a corner of their own making, sweating over the very real prospect of absolute financial annihilation. Just as their panic reached a boiling point, I delivered the Trojan horse. A second courier pulled into my parents' driveway the very next morning, carrying a heavy platinum-embossed envelope sealed with the Apex Global corporate crest. Gregory, likely expecting another legal threat or a court summons, probably opened it with trembling hands. Instead of a lawsuit, he pulled out 4 thick metallic VIP passes. They were exclusive invitations to the Apex Global Annual Leadership Gala, explicitly addressed to Gregory, Brenda, Chelsea, and Marcus. The accompanying letter, printed on heavy linen paper, was brief and deliberately vague. It requested their immediate presence at our flagship Manhattan event to resolve all outstanding family matters and celebrate the future of Apex Global's new acquisitions. In any rational household, receiving a VIP gala invitation immediately following a threat of financial ruin would be viewed with deep, paralyzing suspicion. But my family did not operate on logic. They operated on an ego so massive it completely blinded them to reality. Through my younger cousin, who still occasionally texted me family gossip, I heard exactly how the invitation was received. Brenda had snatched the platinum cards from Gregory's hands, her eyes wide with greedy triumph. "See," Brenda had shrieked, waving the invitations in the air like a winning lottery ticket. The lawsuit scared her. She realized she cannot beat us in court without destroying her own corporate reputation. She is terrified of the bad press. Chelsea, desperate to distract Marcus from the $1.2 million hole she had blown in their finances, eagerly jumped on the bandwagon. "Valerie is humiliated," Chelsea had declared, already inspecting her nails and planning her outfit. "She knows her bosses are furious about the scandal. She is inviting us to make amends. She is going to publicly apologize and give us our cut of the money to make all this go away." Marcus, a man whose entire identity was built on aggressive posturing, convinced himself that his social media smear campaign had successfully bullied a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate into submission. He actually bragged to his coworkers that he had strong-armed a vice president into a massive quiet settlement. They genuinely believed I was raising the white flag. They thought the VIP passes were their golden tickets to the upper echelon of Manhattan society. Their delusion kicked into high gear, overriding any lingering financial anxiety. Convinced that a payout of at least $1.5 million was imminent, they decided they needed to look the part of wealthy benefactors stepping in to save a wayward daughter. Chelsea, completely ignoring her looming commercial warehouse foreclosure, maxed out her remaining credit limit on a custom-beaded designer gown. Brenda spent a small fortune on a trip to a high-end salon and purchased a diamond necklace she claimed was a necessary investment for networking with Manhattan billionaires. Gregory and Marcus both bought custom-tailored tuxedos, convinced they would be shaking hands with titans of industry by the end of the night. To complete their opulent fantasy, they refused to take a train or fly commercial into the city. Instead, Gregory rented a stretch limousine for the entire weekend, stocking it with expensive champagne they absolutely could not afford. They were operating under the absolute certainty that they were about to walk into an opulent ballroom, accept a massive apology check, and bask in my public subjugation. They had no idea they were walking straight into an execution. The oversized stretch limousine pulled up to the curb outside the Pierre Hotel, looking entirely out of place among the sleek, understated town cars and private sedans of Manhattan's financial elite. The valet opened the door, and my family spilled out onto the red carpet like a clown car at a circus. Gregory stepped out first, adjusting the lapels of a tuxedo that was trying far too hard to look expensive. Brenda followed, draped in heavy rhinestones and a suffocating cloud of department store perfume. Then came Chelsea and Marcus, radiating a toxic cocktail of arrogance and desperate financial ruin. They glided past the velvet ropes, flashing their VIP passes at the security detail with exaggerated importance. The Apex Global Leadership Gala was the most exclusive corporate event of the year, a room filled with billionaires, tech innovators, and hedge fund titans. My family walked in acting as if they owned the building. From the elevated VIP balcony, I watched the absolute train wreck unfold. I stood quietly in the shadows of a massive floral arrangement, sipping sparkling water. I wore a custom-tailored razor-sharp charcoal suit. There were no sequins, no flashy logos, no desperate attempts to prove my net worth. Real power in this room was completely silent, a concept my family had never understood. Down below, they were a blaring siren of insecurity. Marcus wasted absolutely no time. He abandoned Chelsea by the coat check and dove headfirst into a crowd of Apex executives. I watched in mild amusement as he cornered our chief financial officer, a man who managed a budget larger than the GDP of several small countries. Marcus thrust his hand out, forcing a handshake before digging into his jacket pocket and aggressively passing out his business cards. He was loudly pitching his mid-tier suburban brokerage firm to men who bought and sold entire corporations before breakfast. The executives exchanged bewildered, polite glances, holding Marcus's cheap card stock like it was contaminated before discreetly dropping it onto passing waiter trays. Marcus noticed none of this, grinning wildly as he moved to his next victim, convinced he was securing wealthy clients to save his sinking ship. Chelsea was faring no better near the Champagne Tower. She had cornered a group of quantitative analysts and was loudly dominating the conversation. Her voice echoed over the smooth jazz playing in the background. "Yes, my genius sister is the guest of honor tonight," Chelsea bragged, taking a massive gulp of champagne. "But obviously you do not build a $3 million predictive algorithm out of thin air." She had a lot of help. My husband and I provided the intellectual foundation for her work. We are practically co-founders. She is actually going to honor our family investments during her keynote speech tonight. It is going to be a very lucrative evening for us. The analysts simply stared at her, their expressions a mix of confusion and secondhand embarrassment. They knew exactly who I was and exactly how my algorithm worked. They also knew that the woman in the overly beaded rented gown, babbling about intellectual foundations, did not even understand basic calculus. I took another sip of my sparkling water, watching them dig their own graves in a room full of people who could ruin them with a single phone call. They were so blinded by their own narcissism that they could not sense the predatory corporate machinery clicking into place all around them. They truly believed they had won. A sharp clatter of heels on the marble staircase pulled my attention away from the ballroom floor. Brenda had spotted me. She marched up the curved staircase, physically shoving past a regional director to reach the VIP balcony. Her face was flushed with champagne and greed. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing with maternal disapproval at my tailored suit. "You could have at least worn a dress," Brenda hissed, stepping uncomfortably close to my personal space. "This is exactly why people do not take you seriously, Valerie. You have no sense of occasion." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at her with a calm, clinical detachment that seemed to unsettle her. Brenda pointed a manicured finger at my chest, dropping her voice into a harsh, commanding whisper. Do not you dare embarrass us tonight. We saw the VIP passes. We know you are finally ready to do the right thing and apologize for your little tantrum. When you get up on that stage, you will publicly announce the 50% transfer to your father. You will secure Chelsea's warehouse debt, and you will give Marcus the credit he deserves for fostering your career. If you try to pull any stunts, if you try to humiliate this family, you are cut off forever. We will never speak to you again. It was the exact same threat she had used since I was a teenager. The threat of abandonment. The threat of losing the family. For 33 years, that threat had kept me in line, forcing me to hand over my savings, my time, and my sanity to keep the peace. She expected me to lower my head, apologize, and frantically agree to her demands just to stay in her good graces. Instead, a slow, cold smirk spread across my face. I reached up and carefully adjusted the audio mic pack clipped to the waistband of my trousers. The green light blinked, signaling that I was connected directly to the master soundboard controlling the entire ballroom below. Oh, I replied, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly clear. I plan on giving you exactly what you deserve tonight, Mom. Brenda's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny flicker of doubt piercing her delusion. Before she could demand an explanation, the ballroom lights dimmed, and the heavy, booming voice of Victor, the Apex Global CEO, echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor announced, the crowd immediately falling into a respectful hush. Please direct your attention to the main stage. I turned my back on my mother, leaving her standing alone in the shadows of the balcony, and walked toward the spotlight. I descended the grand staircase with deliberate, measured steps. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns, a gathering of 500 of the most ruthless and brilliant minds in global finance. Victor stood at the podium on the main stage, his voice projecting absolute authority as he commanded the room's attention. He spoke of innovation, of Apex Global's aggressive expansion into predictive risk modeling, and of the staggering $3 million acquisition that had made it all possible. Then he raised his hand toward me. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor announced, please welcome our newest Vice President and Chief Architect of Risk Analytics, Valerie Wilson. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the gilded ceiling as I approached the stage. I stepped up to the microphone, the glare of the spotlight washing over me. I let the applause roll for a few seconds before raising a hand to quiet the room. The silence that followed was absolute. 500 billionaires, hedge fund managers, and industry titans waited with rapt attention. I looked down into the sea of faces and immediately locked eyes with my family. They had somehow managed to bulldoze their way into the very front row, elbowing past actual dignitaries to secure the best view of what they believed was their impending coronation. Gregory and Brenda were practically vibrating with smug satisfaction, puffing out their chests like royalty. Chelsea had her phone out ready to record the moment I supposedly signed over half my wealth to her failing warehouse. Marcus stood beside her, a smug, entitled grin plastered across his face, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing in a room full of people who knew exactly how much his cheap suit actually cost. I adjusted the microphone stand, letting my gaze sweep across the vast ballroom before settling back on my family. Many people ask how my algorithm calculates catastrophic financial risk. Let me show you a real-world case study of a sinking ship. I clicked the remote presenter in my hand. The massive high-definition LED screen spanning the entire wall behind me instantly flared to life. Gasps rippled through the front rows. I had not loaded an abstract graph or a sanitized corporate model. I had loaded the completely unredacted, horrific financial autopsy of Chelsea's cosmetic company. Every hidden ledger, every desperate maneuver, every toxic liability was projected in razor-sharp clarity for the wealthiest people in Manhattan to read. I began pacing the stage, speaking with the cold, surgical precision of a coroner dissecting a corpse. If you direct your attention to the primary balance sheet I instructed, pointing the laser at a glaring column of red numbers, you will witness the anatomy of a localized economic disaster. Here we see a business built entirely on aesthetic delusion rather than viable market demand. Notice the rapid influx of predatory high-interest commercial loans taken out in quarter three, specifically to cover the manufacturing costs of unsellable inventory. You can see the exact moment the debt-to-income ratio spirals out of control, creating an inescapable gravity well of insolvency. I clicked to the next slide, exposing the collateral damage. My family's smug smiles had completely vanished, replaced by a sickening pale horror. Gregory was staring at the screen with his mouth hanging open, his face draining of blood as he recognized his own bank account numbers blown up in 50-point font. But a sinking ship rarely goes down alone. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly over the silent crowd. To keep this failing venture afloat, the founders resorted to cannibalizing familial assets. Here is the direct line showing the stolen retirement funds of a senior family member poured directly into a commercial lease that is currently 72 hours away from foreclosure. A lifetime of savings obliterated in a matter of months to fund a vanity project that had zero chance of yielding a return. I clicked again, zooming in on a specific damning cluster of leveraged debt. And here we see a secondary actor attempting to absorb the impact. A mid-tier suburban broker desperate to maintain a facade of wealth, aggressively leveraging his own personal assets and exposing his firm to toxic debt just to cover his wife's massive deficit. The numbers do not lie. They reveal a coordinated pattern of gross financial mismanagement, staggering incompetence, and a complete lack of basic economic literacy. They show a group of people who believed they could simply borrow and spend their way to success without ever actually doing the work. I stepped back to the center of the stage, standing directly beneath the glowing, catastrophic proof of their ruin. I looked straight down at Marcus and Chelsea, who were now shrinking back into their seats, their faces burning with a humiliation so profound it was almost palpable. Marcus was sweating profusely, his eyes darting around the room as he realized that the very executives he had just handed his business cards to were now reading the exact details of his impending financial doom. Chelsea looked like she was about to faint, her phone hanging limply in her hand, the recording completely forgotten. As you can see, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. The arrogance of the founders blinded them to the reality of their massive deficit. This is what financial delusion looks like. The entire ballroom stared at Chelsea and Marcus in absolute shock. The silence was deafening, save for the hum of the projector and the soft clinking of ice in crystal glasses. 500 industry leaders, the true elite of Manhattan, were now looking at them not as peers, but as a cautionary tale of reckless stupidity. Brenda was gripping Gregory's arm, her face a mask of pure terror as the reality of my public execution finally sank in. They had wanted the spotlight. They had demanded the attention of the elite. Now they had it all. The silence in the ballroom stretched until it became a physical weight pressing down on the front row. Marcus stood paralyzed next to his seat. His eyes were locked on the towering LED screen. The numbers glowing in harsh red light were not abstract projections. They were his personal bank accounts, his leveraged assets, and the fraudulent loans his wife had secured using his signature as collateral. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He had not just married into a struggling business. He had chained himself to a sinking anchor of active financial fraud. The elite executives standing mere feet away from Marcus, the very same men he had aggressively handed his business cards to moments earlier, were now staring at him with undisguised disgust. They saw him not as a peer, but as a liability, a fool who had been swindled by his own wife. For a man whose entire existence relied on projecting superiority, the absolute exposure was too much to bear. Something inside Marcus snapped. He pivoted sharply, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. He completely forgot where he was. He forgot the billionaires, the CEOs, and the silent audience. He grabbed Chelsea by the arm, his voice echoing violently through the cavernous room. "You lied to me!" Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me the cosmetic line was profitable. You told me the warehouse lease was secure. You forged my signature on those commercial loans." Chelsea yanked her arm away, her face flushing a deep mottled red. The heavy rhinestones on her rented designer gown clattered as she stumbled back. She looked wildly at the hundreds of faces staring down at her, realizing her high society debut had just turned into a public autopsy of her failures. Cornered and panicked, she lashed out with the only defense mechanism she knew. "Keep your voice down!" Chelsea shrieked, her pitch matching his hysteria. "You knew we needed capital. You are the one who insisted we maintain our lifestyle. You are just as guilty as I am." "I am bankrupt because of you," Marcus roared back, stepping into her space. "You ruined me. You stole from my firm. I am going to lose my license because of your incompetent vanity project." Chelsea did not back down. Instead, she raised her hand and delivered a sharp, resounding slap across Marcus's face. The sharp crack echoed through the silent ballroom, causing several nearby hedge fund managers to physically recoil. Gregory jumped up from his chair, his custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looking entirely ridiculous on a man engaged in a public brawl. He shoved himself between his daughter and his son-in-law, his chest puffed out in a desperate attempt to assert the authority he no longer possessed. "Do not you ever raise your voice to my daughter," Gregory shouted, jabbing a thick finger into Marcus's chest. "This is a family matter. We will handle this at home. Keep your mouth shut before you embarrass us further." Marcus let out a manic, breathless laugh. "Embarrass us? We are standing in a room full of the most powerful people in Manhattan, and your other daughter just broadcasted our financial ruin on a 50-foot screen. We are already destroyed, Gregory. And it is your fault for raising a spoiled, incompetent liar." Brenda grabbed Gregory's arm, pulling frantically at his sleeve. "Gregory, stop it!" she pleaded, her voice a desperate, reedy whine. "Everyone is watching us. We need to sit down. We need to act like we belong here." But the illusion of belonging was dead and buried. The argument devolved into a vicious, overlapping shouting match. Marcus cursed at Chelsea for her fraud. Gregory threatened to ruin Marcus. Chelsea screamed at both of them for ruining her night. They were a writhing, chaotic knot of suburban dysfunction, completely oblivious to the sleek, synchronized movement happening at the edges of the room. Apex Global did not employ bouncers. They employed elite, highly trained private security professionals who operated with absolute discretion and ruthless efficiency. Within seconds of Chelsea slapping Marcus, 6 men in immaculate dark suits materialized from the shadows of the ballroom. They did not run. They did not shout. They simply glided down the center aisle and surrounded my family in a tight, impenetrable perimeter. The lead security officer, a tall man with an earpiece and a face carved from granite, stepped smoothly between Marcus and Gregory. He did not raise his voice above a polite conversational murmur, but his tone left absolutely zero room for negotiation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officer said smoothly, "it is time for you to leave the premises. Right this way, please." Gregory bristled, trying to shake off the hand the officer had placed firmly on his shoulder. "You cannot touch me," Gregory sputtered, his face slick with sweat. "I am a VIP guest. I am the father of the vice president." The officer did not even blink. "You are trespassing on a private corporate event, sir. You will walk to the exits voluntarily, or we will assist you. There is a police cruiser parked at the loading dock if you would prefer to escalate this matter." The threat of arrest finally pierced through their collective hysteria. The fight drained out of them, instantly replaced by a cold, crushing reality. Marcus looked around the room one last time, his chest heaving, his face pale. He saw the cold stares of the executives he had tried to impress. He looked up at the stage, his eyes meeting mine. There was no victory in his gaze, only the devastating realization that he had played a game he never understood and lost everything. The security detail moved in perfect unison, herding Gregory, Brenda, Chelsea, and Marcus up the center aisle. They were physically marched past the rows of seated billionaires, past the champagne towers, and out through the heavy mahogany doors. The entire ballroom watched their walk of shame in absolute unblinking silence. I stood perfectly still on the main stage, my hands resting lightly on the podium. I watched the heavy doors swing shut behind them, sealing them out of my world forever. The toxic weight I had carried for 33 years vanished. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence of the room settle over me. I reached for my glass of sparkling water, took a small, elegant sip, and placed it back on the podium. I looked out at the 500 industry leaders waiting in the dark. I adjusted the microphone. As I was saying, I continued my voice smooth, commanding, and utterly devoid of emotion. Predictive analytics requires us to strip away emotional bias and look exclusively at the raw data. When we remove the delusion, the risk profiles become entirely predictable. Let us move to the next slide and examine how Apex Global identifies these liabilities before they compromise our core infrastructure. For a heartbeat, the room remained silent. Then a single executive in the third row began to clap. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted. 500 people rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The applause was deafening, a roaring wave of validation for my icy, flawless professionalism. They did not care about the family drama. They cared about the brutal, brilliant execution of a problem. I stood under the bright stage lights, absorbing the applause, finally standing exactly where I belonged. The morning sun broke over the Manhattan skyline, flooding my penthouse in a wash of brilliant, sterile light. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapped in a silk robe, watching the city wake up far below. The silence in my apartment was profound. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of walking on eggshells around my family's explosive tempers. It was the deep, resonant quiet of absolute peace, the kind of peace you only achieve after burning a toxic forest to the ground. I held a demi-tasse of freshly brewed espresso, letting the rich aroma fill the kitchen. Last night had been a masterclass in corporate execution. The fallout, however, was destined to be biblical. Right on cue, my cell phone began to vibrate against the marble countertop. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it buzz for a few seconds, savoring the frantic energy radiating from the small device, before calmly swiping to accept the call. I did not even have a chance to say hello. "You ruined us!" Brenda shrieked into the receiver. Her voice was a ragged, hysterical rasp, entirely stripped of the haughty superiority she had worn like armor the night before. "You absolute monster! You destroyed your sister." Marcus packed his bags at 3 in the morning and left. He completely abandoned her. He said he is filing for divorce and reporting her to the Securities and Exchange Commission to save his own license. Chelsea has been throwing up in the guest bathroom for 6 hours. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, letting the bitter heat wash over my tongue. I felt absolutely no pity for Chelsea. She had built her entire identity on a foundation of lies, using stolen family funds to masquerade as a successful entrepreneur. Marcus was a coward, but his reaction was entirely predictable. Rats always abandon a sinking ship the moment the water breaches the hull. "That sounds like a personal dispute between a husband and wife, Mom," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotional inflection. I fail to see how Chelsea's marital problems are my responsibility. My presentation last night was strictly business. I merely presented factual data to my colleagues. If the truth ruined her marriage, perhaps she should not have married a man who only loved her illusion of wealth. "It is not just Marcus," Brenda wailed, her panic escalating into a shrill, breathless sob. "The bank is calling your father. They have been calling since 7 this morning. It is a nightmare, Valerie. It is an absolute nightmare." I leaned against the cool marble counter, my interest genuinely piqued. A marital dispute was one thing, but a banking crisis meant the dominoes were falling much faster than I had anticipated. The executives in that ballroom had not just watched the presentation for entertainment, they had recognized the exposure, they had made phone calls. The predators were already circling the wounded prey. "Why is the bank calling Mom?" I asked, my tone conversational, as if asking about the weather. "Because of you!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "Because you put all those numbers on that massive screen. You exposed Chelsea's warehouse debt to every major investor in the city. The creditors panicked. They triggered an immediate review of all associated assets to check for cross-contamination. They flagged Gregory's accounts. They flagged everything." I waited, letting the silence stretch over the line. I knew Chelsea had drained her own accounts, but Gregory was usually incredibly protective of his personal wealth. He was arrogant, but he was also fundamentally selfish. For the bank to be calling him directly, the exposure had to be catastrophic. "What did he do, Mom?" I pressed, keeping my voice icy and precise. "He was trying to help her," Brenda sobbed, the sound pathetic and utterly defeated. "He was just trying to protect his little girl. When Chelsea could not secure any more commercial loans for that stupid cosmetic manufacturing run, the suppliers threatened to seize her existing inventory. Gregory panicked. He wanted to maintain the family image. He could not bear the thought of Chelsea failing publicly. Get to the point, Brenda. He took out a second mortgage." She confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and terror. "He illegally leveraged the family home to cover her manufacturing costs. He forged some of the asset declarations to push it through faster. He thought Chelsea was going to turn a massive profit this quarter. He thought he could pay it back before anyone noticed the discrepancy. But the creditors saw your presentation. They saw the debt ratio. They pulled the trigger on the clauses. They are foreclosing on the house, Valerie." The sheer magnitude of Gregory's stupidity hung in the air. He had gambled the roof over their heads to fund a doomed vanity project entirely driven by his need to project a fake aura of generational wealth. He had committed active financial fraud, risking federal charges just to keep Chelsea playing pretend. Now the bill had come due. He had handed the bank the deed to his life, and I had just handed them the magnifying glass. "The bank is demanding immediate repayment of the entire balance." Brenda wept, her voice devolving into a frantic begging whine. "They are taking everything. They are freezing the accounts. We are going to be on the street, Valerie. Your father is having chest pains. Chelsea is completely catatonic. You have $3 million from that acquisition. You are a vice president now. You have to save us. You have to wire the funds today. Please, Valerie, you are our only hope." I stood looking out over the sprawling, glittering expanse of the city. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse. I thought about the constant belittling, the theft of my time, the relentless demands that I make myself smaller so Chelsea could feel bigger. I thought about the night they cornered me in my childhood home, demanding I hand over my algorithm, treating my life's work as a communal piggy bank they were entitled to smash open. They had never protected me. They had never sheltered me. They had only ever viewed me as a resource to be extracted. Now, standing on the edge of the abyss they had dug with their own hands, they expected me to jump in and cushion their fall. "I guess you should have planned better," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper of absolute chilling finality. "Try Uber." I tapped the red button on the screen and ended the call. I placed my phone face down on the marble island, the sharp clink of the device ringing with absolute finality. The morning sun continued to climb over the Manhattan skyline, casting long golden shadows across the pristine hardwood floors of my penthouse. For 33 years, a phone call like that would have sent me into a blind panic. I would have drained my savings, sacrificed my own stability, and set myself on fire just to keep my family warm. Not today. I poured myself a second espresso, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the latest risk analytic models for Apex Global. I spent the next 2 hours working in absolute tranquility, entirely disconnected from the suburban meltdown unfolding miles away. The peace was broken by the polite, sharp chime of the internal intercom connecting my penthouse to the lobby concierge. I tapped the screen to answer. The voice of Henri, our usually unflappable head concierge, sounded distinctly strained. "Miss Wilson, I apologize for the intrusion," Henri stated, his tone carefully maintaining its professional polish. "There is a woman in the lobby causing a severe disturbance. She claims to be your sister and is demanding immediate access to your residence." I raised an eyebrow and switched the intercom to access the lobby security feed. The high-definition camera displayed a scene of absolute unhinged chaos. Chelsea had actually made the trip. She was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant woman dripping in rhinestones at the Pierre Hotel just hours prior. Her hair was a tangled, greasy mess. She wore yesterday's sweatpants and a stained designer hoodie, her face puffy and streaked with leftover mascara. She was leaning aggressively over the imported Italian marble reception desk, jabbing her finger just inches from Henri's face. Even without audio, her manic desperation was palpable. I grabbed my suit blazer and headed for the private elevator, watching the live feed on my phone as I descended. As the elevator glided silently down the 60 floors, I patched into the lobby audio. Chelsea's shrill, hysterical voice flooded the small cabin. "Do you know who I am?" Chelsea screamed, slapping her palm flat against the marble desk. "I am the sister of the Apex Global Vice President. She owes me everything. I need to go up there right now, and I am not leaving until she writes me a blank check. The bank is stealing my house today." Henri stepped back slightly from her aggressive posture, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "I am sorry, ma'am, but Miss Wilson has not authorized any guests. I must ask you to lower your voice or leave the premises immediately." The suggestion of leaving was the spark that ignited Chelsea's remaining shreds of sanity. She completely lost her grip on reality. She let out a guttural shriek and spun around, grabbing a massive imported floral arrangement resting on a sleek glass pedestal nearby. With a violent two-handed shove, she pushed the entire display over. The heavy crystal vase shattered against the pristine lobby floor with a deafening crash, sending water-fragmented glass and white orchids exploding across the walkway. Henri signaled immediately. Before Chelsea could grab a brass stanchion to cause more damage, 3 building security officers descended upon her. They moved with swift, uncompromising force, pinning her arms behind her back and forcing her down onto a leather lobby sofa. She thrashed wildly, kicking her feet and screaming obscenities that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Call the police," Henri instructed calmly, picking up his desk phone. The polished silver doors of my private elevator slid open with a soft chime. I stepped out into the lobby wearing crisp tailored slacks and a silk blouse, looking perfectly composed and completely untouched by her chaos. The security guards looked up immediately, stepping back to give me space, though they kept a firm, restraining grip on Chelsea's arms. The distant wail of police sirens was already bleeding through the heavy revolving glass doors. Chelsea stopped thrashing the second she saw me. Her chest heaved, her eyes wide and bloodshot. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, feral panic. "Valerie?" She gasped, struggling against the guards. "Tell them to let me go. Tell them who I am. You have to give me the money. Marcus left me. Gregory is losing the house. They are taking my warehouse. You have millions. You have to save me." I walked forward slowly, my heels clicking over the scattered orchids and shattered crystal. I stopped just out of her reach, looking down at her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "I did not do this to you, Chelsea," I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the ruined lobby. "You did this to yourself. You forged documents. You stole retirement funds. You built a fake life on a foundation of massive predatory debt. The math simply caught up with you." Chelsea's face twisted into a mask of pure vitriolic hatred. "You stole my life," she shrieked, spit flying from her lips. "You set me up. You always wanted to ruin me because you were jealous. You are a monster." 2 NYPD officers pushed through the revolving doors, their heavy boots crunching over the broken glass. They quickly assessed the situation, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. They hauled Chelsea to her feet, roughly securing her wrists behind her back. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, looking at me respectfully. "The concierge stated this woman was attempting to force entry to your residence and destroyed building property. Do you want to press charges?" Chelsea stared at me, her eyes wide, suddenly realizing that the safety net was completely gone. The lifelong shield of family protection had evaporated. She was standing in handcuffs, surrounded by shattered glass and armed police officers waiting for me to save her. I looked at my sister. I saw the 29 years of entitlement, the relentless bullying, and the absolute certainty that she would never have to face the consequences of her own actions. I turned my attention back to the police officer. "I have never seen her before in my life," I replied smoothly. "She is trespassing. Process her." Chelsea's jaw dropped. The color completely drained from her face. "Valerie!" She screamed, a sound of absolute, unadulterated terror as the officers began to drag her toward the exit. "Valerie, please. You cannot do this. I am your sister. You cannot let them take me." I turned my back to her and walked calmly toward the concierge desk. I pulled a sleek platinum card from my pocket and slid it across the marble counter. Add the cost of the floral arrangement and the lobby cleanup to my monthly maintenance fee, Henrias instructed. And please ensure building security keeps a photo of that woman on file. She is permanently banned from the premises. Henri nodded, taking the card. Right away, Miss Wilson. Behind me, the heavy glass doors revolved, cutting off Chelsea's frantic, hysterical screams. The flashing red and blue lights of the squad car painted the lobby walls as they shoved her into the back seat. I stepped back into my private elevator, the doors sliding shut on the chaotic street below. As the cabin lifted me back toward the penthouse, Chelsea finally faced the natural consequences of her life, and I finally stepped into mine. The arrest in the lobby was merely the overture to the symphony of destruction playing out across the city. Apex Global's legal department had not simply drafted a 70-page countersuit for extortion and corporate sabotage as a scare tactic. They had deployed it as a targeted missile, and the collateral damage was spectacular. By Tuesday morning, the dominoes began to fall with biblical severity crashing through the remaining illusions of my family's fabricated wealth. When Chelsea's massive commercial debts became public knowledge during my presentation, the shockwave rippled outward, slamming directly into Gregory's accounts. The creditors, spooked by the sheer volume of fraudulent activity, triggered an immediate microscopic review of his assets to assess the contamination. They expected to find a foolish father who had over-leveraged his family home to help a struggling child. Instead, they uncovered a sprawling financial crime scene. Gregory had operated for decades as an independent wealth manager. He curated portfolios for upper-middle-class clients who trusted his conservative, authoritative facade. But the audit revealed the rotten core of his operation. In his desperate bid to keep Chelsea's failing cosmetic company afloat, Gregory had not just taken out an illegal second mortgage on the family home. He had systematically commingled his clients' funds with Chelsea's bleeding business accounts. He had funneled life savings, college funds, and retirement accounts directly into the incinerator of his youngest daughter's vanity project, forging asset declarations to hide the bleeding. The response from the regulatory agencies was instantaneous and merciless. By Wednesday afternoon, FINRA and the Securities and Exchange Commission descended upon his suburban office. The glass doors were padlocked, boxes of hard drives and physical ledgers were confiscated by federal agents. Gregory was unceremoniously stripped of his licenses. He was barred from the financial industry for life, but losing his career was the absolute least of his problems. The federal charges were looming overhead: wire fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. He was looking at a decade in federal prison. The absolute silence from my family was finally broken on Thursday morning. My phone vibrated with a text message. It was not a demand, it was not a threat, it was a pathetic, groveling plea from a man who had finally realized he was entirely out of leverage. Gregory asked to meet. He chose a run-down, greasy spoon diner deep in Queens, miles away from the mahogany-paneled steakhouses where he used to hold court. He chose it because he could no longer afford Manhattan prices, and because he desperately needed to hide from the society that had just violently rejected him. I arrived precisely on time. I wore a tailored trench coat over a simple, elegant sheath dress, my posture perfectly aligned. The diner smelled of old frying oil and stale bleach. I spotted Gregory sitting in a cracked vinyl booth in the back corner. The physical transformation was staggering. The commanding, arrogant patriarch who had sneered at my career choices just days prior was gone. In his place sat a hollowed-out, graying old man. His suit was wrinkled, his collar was frayed, he was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he gripped a thick ceramic coffee mug. I slid into the booth opposite him. I did not order anything. I simply folded my hands on the laminate table and waited. Valerie Gregory began. His voice was a raspy, broken wheeze. "Thank you for coming. I know you have every right to ignore me." I remained completely silent. The quiet unnerved him, forcing him to keep talking to fill the void with his desperation. "The feds are breathing down my neck," he stammered, his eyes darting around the empty diner, as if expecting agents to emerge from the kitchen. They have everything. The ledgers, the transfer receipts. The bank is foreclosing on the house tomorrow morning. Brenda is packing what she can into garbage bags. We have absolutely nothing left. You engineered your own ruin, Gregory stated cleanly. You stole from innocent people to fund Chelsea's delusions. The math was always going to catch up with you. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his jawline. Apex Global is still pushing the extortion countersuit against me and Marcus. Marcus is gone, Valerie. He fled to Nevada to stay with his brother. He left Chelsea to face the criminal fraud charges alone. But the regulatory board, they are looking at the Apex suit as proof of character. If Apex drops the suit, if you tell Victor to withdraw the charges, I can show the federal judge good faith. I can tell them it was a family misunderstanding. It might keep me out of a maximum security facility. You have the power to stop that specific suit. You are a vice president. I tilted my head, studying the sheer audacity of his request. Even now, facing federal prison, he believed he could extract one last favor from the daughter he had spent a lifetime diminishing. You want me to use my corporate influence to shield you from the consequences of your felonies? I clarified, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Gregory leaned across the sticky table, his eyes wide and pleading. He reached out, attempting to cover my folded hands with his own. I pulled my hands back smoothly, letting his fingers land on the bare laminate. Valerie, please, he begged, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, emotional whisper. He was attempting to deploy the ultimate manipulation, the final rewrite of our entire family history. You have to understand why I did it. Why I was always so hard on you. Why I gave Chelsea everything and demanded everything from you. I waited, my expression entirely unreadable. I was tough on you because I knew you were the strong one, Gregory said, his voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. I saw your brilliance. I knew you could handle the pressure. Chelsea was weak. She was fragile. She needed the support. She needed the money just to survive. I had to protect her because she could not protect herself. I pushed you away because I knew you would succeed on your own. I did it out of love, Valerie. I did it because you were the only one who could survive it. The gaslighting was almost artistic in its execution. He was attempting to reframe 33 years of financial abuse, emotional neglect, and blatant favoritism as a grueling training montage designed for my benefit. He wanted me to believe that his cruelty was actually a twisted form of paternal faith. I looked at the man who had gladly watched his favorite daughter try to steal my life's work. I looked at the man who had bet his family's home on a lie. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I picked up the small, grease-stained receipt the waitress had left at the edge of the table for his black coffee. I placed the 20 over the receipt and slid it deliberately across the table until it rested directly against his trembling hands. I stood up, smoothing the front of my trench coat. I looked down at him, my voice colder than the ice in the harbor outside. Your weakness isn't my liability. I walked out of the diner without looking back, the bell above the door jingling to signal my final exit from Gregory's life. The crisp Manhattan air felt like a physical cleanse after the stale desperation of that booth. I returned to my office, completely unbothered by the collapse of the man who had spent a lifetime demanding my submission. My phone stayed silent for exactly 48 hours before the next rat attempted to flee the sinking ship. The legal alerts hit my inbox early Tuesday morning. Marcus had officially filed for divorce. It was a vicious, highly publicized filing. He was suing Chelsea for extreme financial fraud, attempting to paint himself as the oblivious, betrayed husband. He wanted the world to believe he was just another innocent victim of the Wilson family delusion. It was a pathetic, transparent strategy, primarily because it relied on everyone forgetting who Marcus actually was and what he had actively participated in. During the first 3 years of their marriage, Marcus had desperately wanted to project the image of a Wall Street baller. He was a mid-level manager who wanted to be seen as a titan. When Chelsea started her cosmetic company, he had eagerly stepped up to co-sign her initial commercial loans. He loved the optics of being a venture capitalist husband funding his beautiful wife's empire. He had blasted his signature across personal guarantees, blindly leveraging his own stock options to keep Chelsea dripping in designer labels and flying first class. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the furious creditors did not care about his current victim narrative. They cared about the ink on the contracts. Marcus was legally on the hook for nearly $800,000 of defaulting loans. His own financial firm, terrified of the PR nightmare, had immediately placed him on unpaid administrative leave pending the federal investigation. He was drowning in the very debt he had proudly authorized, and the water was rising fast. My private office line rang precisely at noon. Only a handful of elite executives had that direct number. I answered, pressing a discreet button on my console to activate the secure recording system I used for all external business calls. "Valerie, thank God you picked up." Marcus sounded entirely out of breath, his voice laced with a manic, sweaty panic that stripped away his usual country club drawl. "I know we have not always seen eye to eye, but I need you to listen to me. We are on the same side now." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the muted financial news scrolling across my monitor. "We have never been on the same side, Marcus. State your business." "Chelsea is insane," he babbled, the words spilling over each other in a frantic rush. "She is completely unhinged. She is trying to drag me down with her to save herself. But I have leverage. I have access to her private cloud storage. I know exactly where she hid the remaining inventory funds, and I have emails proving Gregory orchestrated the forged asset declarations to get that second mortgage. I have the dirt, Valerie, enough to bury them both permanently and keep your name completely out of the press." "And what exactly do you want for this alleged dirt?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, giving him enough rope to hang himself. "I need a lifeline," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The defense lawyers are asking for a $200,000 retainer just to take my case. My firm froze all my accounts. The creditors are threatening to seize my car and my condo by the end of the week. Just cover my legal fees. That amount is pocket change for you now. Pay the retainer and I will hand over the hard drive. We can destroy her together." I listened to his ragged breathing echoing through the receiver. I closed my eyes and remembered the lavish country club dinners where Marcus would sit next to Chelsea, laughing loudly as she mocked my apartment, my clothes, and my career trajectory. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner he had casually suggested I should be grateful my parents even invited me, considering I was such a relentless buzzkill who refused to celebrate their success. He had happily eaten their food, drank their expensive wine, and validated their cruelty, all because it bought him a seat at the high society table he so desperately craved. He was not a victim of their manipulation. He was a willing, eager accomplice who was only expressing regret because the fraudulent checks had finally bounced. "You misunderstand your position, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "I do not need your hard drive. Apex Global's forensic accounting team has already mapped every fraudulent cent your wife and my father ever moved. We have the metadata. We have the transfer receipts. They are already buried under federal evidence. Your stolen dirt is entirely worthless to me." "Valerie, please, you have to help me," he begged, the panic morphing into a pathetic whine. "I will lose my license. I will go to jail. They are going to take everything I have. You enabled my abusers for years just to sit at their country club table," I stated, pronouncing each word with lethal precision. "You watched them tear me down and you smiled because it kept you in their good graces. You loved the aesthetic of wealth so much you co-signed the very fraud that funded it. You bought the ticket, Marcus. Now enjoy the ride." I disconnected the line before he could draw another breath to beg. I tapped the screen, permanently blocking his number from the Apex server and all my personal devices. The audio recording of his attempt to extort me would be forwarded directly to my legal team simply to add to the mountain of evidence already crushing his future. With Marcus officially neutralized, and Gregory facing federal indictments, the empire of lies was almost entirely dismantled. But there was still one loose end frantically trying to hold the crumbling facade together. Brenda was still hiding inside that foreclosed mansion, clutching her pearls and pretending the storm was not tearing the roof off. It was time to deal with the architect of the illusion. The swift and brutal collapse of the Wilson family empire left a vacuum that reality immediately filled with squalor. Gregory's federal indictment had frozen all remaining legitimate accounts. The bank had officially taken possession of the suburban estate, locking the heavy custom doors and placing a glaring neon foreclosure notice right over the polished brass knocker. Chelsea, stripped of her husband, her credit cards, and her unearned dignity, was reportedly living in a cheap roadside motel off the interstate. She was paying by the week, likely selling off the last of her designer handbags just to keep the lights on. I did not care to verify the specific details of their misery. I was entirely consumed with a massive European acquisition for Apex Global. I operated with surgical, ruthless precision, my mind blissfully free of the suburban melodrama that had suffocated me for my entire life. But narcissists never accept defeat quietly. They always have one final desperate performance left in their repertoire. It was a brisk, windy Tuesday morning when my private town car pulled up to the gleaming glass facade of the Apex Global headquarters in Manhattan. The Financial District Plaza was bustling with high-level executives, all moving with purpose and holding steaming cups of artisan coffee. I stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer, mentally preparing for an aggressive board meeting. As I approached the revolving doors, a frantic figure lunged out from the shadow of a massive marble pillar, deliberately blocking my path to the entrance. Building security instantly stepped forward, their hands dropping to their radios, but I raised a single gloved finger, signaling them to hold their positions. I wanted to see this play out. It was Brenda. For a fraction of a second, I genuinely did not recognize my own mother. The woman who had spent her entire adult life aggressively curating an image of effortless, untouchable wealth looked utterly pathetic. She was wearing a faded beige trench coat that had clearly been deliberately crumpled and wrinkled to simulate hardship. Underneath, she wore baggy, mismatched clothes and scuffed orthopedic flats. Her hair, usually sprayed into a rigid, expensive helmet of perfection, hung limp and unwashed around her pale face. She had completely bypassed her usual heavy makeup, ensuring her skin looked sallow and exhausted. It was a masterclass in theatrical destitution, a highly calculated costume designed to elicit maximum public sympathy from the wealthy professionals walking past us. Valerie, Brenda cried out, her voice a reedy, dramatic wail, specifically calibrated to catch the attention of the passing executives. She threw herself forward, attempting to grab my arms. I stepped back smoothly, my expression completely blank, letting her hands grasp empty air. Deprived of physical contact, she stumbled dramatically, catching herself against the brass railing of the building's entrance, and burst into heavy, theatrical sobs. "We have nothing," she wept, her shoulders heaving with exaggerated despair. "They took the house, Valerie. They took the cars. They froze the accounts. Chelsea is sleeping in a disgusting motel room that smells like cheap bleach, and your father is facing a federal judge. We are completely ruined. I am your mother. You came from my womb. You owe me. You have to help us. You are the only one left who can fix this. You have to give us a place to stay." I stared at her, analyzing her performance with clinical detachment. I noted the distinct lack of actual tears in her eyes. It was the exact same performance she used to give when she wanted Gregory to finance a luxury vacation, just repackaged and repurposed for a different objective. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that I was permanently immune to the act. I did not flinch. I did not offer a comforting hand. I simply let the silence stretch, forcing her to wallow in the awkward public echo of her own manipulation. When the weeping failed to yield any reaction from me, Brenda seamlessly shifted her strategy. She wiped her dry eyes and looked up at me, replacing the helpless victim routine with the mask of a secret, devoted ally. "I always loved you best, Valerie," she lied effortlessly, stepping closer and lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I never wanted things to be this way. I tried to protect you from Gregory. I really did. I even tried to save you from his blatant favoritism toward your sister." She reached out again, pressing her hands to her chest as if wounded by her own maternal devotion. "You do not know this," she continued, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "But I secretly set up a college fund just for you. I put money away every single month so you would not have to take out those terrible loans. I wanted you to have the exact same start as Chelsea. I wanted to give you the world. But Gregory wouldn't let me give it to you. He found the paperwork, and he took control of the accounts. He forced me to close it. I fought for you, Valerie. I was always on your side. It was the most audacious, sickening lie she had ever attempted to sell me. She was banking on my desperate childhood need for maternal validation. She thought a crumb of fake affection would buy her a penthouse suite. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my smartphone. I opened a highly secure encrypted cloud folder I had curated years ago. With a few quick taps, I pulled up a digitized banking ledger from a regional bank in Massachusetts. I held the bright screen up, holding it steady, so she was forced to look at the highlighted transaction. You mean the college fund you drained to buy Chelsea's first wedding dress? I asked, my voice slicing through the crisp morning air with absolute lethal precision. The bank teller was my college roommate mom. I've known for 10 years. I watched the exact moment Brenda realized she had severely, fatally miscalculated. I watched her eyes dart across the illuminated screen, recognizing her own distinctive signature on the massive withdrawal slip. The date on the document was exactly 1 month before Chelsea's lavish, over-the-top first wedding. I watched the horrible realization dawn on her that I had known about her ultimate betrayal for a full decade. I had known she stole my future to buy her favorite daughter a dress, and I had simply sat in absolute silence, letting her play her foolish, arrogant games while I built an empire she could never touch. The weeping stopped instantly. The tragic, stooping posture vanished. Brenda stood up straight, the facade of the destitute, helpless mother shattering into a million jagged pieces right there on the concrete. The fake tears evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, venomous glare. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping under her skin. Her hands curled into tight fists at her sides. The manipulation was completely useless, and she finally understood that I was not her backup plan. I was the brick wall she had just crashed into at full speed. I slipped the phone back into my bag and snapped the clasp shut. Your performance is over, I stated calmly. I turned to the building security detail standing nearby, their eyes wide as they watched the exchange. Escort this woman off the property, I instructed smoothly. If she returns, have her immediately arrested for harassment and trespassing. I did not turn around to watch them physically remove her from the plaza. I did not listen to the vile curses she began screaming as the guards grabbed her arms. I simply walked through the revolving glass doors, stepped into my private elevator, and went to work. Brenda's humiliating display in the corporate plaza should have been the grand finale. Normal people possess a biological limit to their own degradation. They recognize when a bridge is burned and possess the basic self-awareness to walk away. Narcissists do not operate under those parameters. When brute force and public guilt trips fail, they invariably pivot to the most insidious tactic in their arsenal. They deploy the fake apology. 3 days later, my private inbox chimed with a highly unusual email. There were no demands. There were no capital letters or exclamation points. It was a brief, seemingly broken message from Brenda, begging for one final dinner. She claimed she had finally hit rock bottom. She wrote that losing the house and watching her family disintegrate had opened her eyes to how terribly she and Gregory had treated me all these years. She wanted to make amends. She wanted closure. She promised she would not ask for a single dime. I knew immediately it was a trap. Brenda did not experience sudden moral epiphanies. She experienced strategic realignments. But a trap is only dangerous if you do not see the teeth hidden under the leaves. I replied with a time and the address of a highly exclusive, impossibly quiet Michelin-starred restaurant in Midtown. I chose it specifically because the environment was hushed and strictly managed. If she attempted her usual screaming theatrics, the elite waitstaff would have her forcibly removed before she could finish a sentence. I arrived early, securing a secluded corner booth heavily draped in shadows. Brenda walked in exactly on time. She had abandoned the wrinkled, destitute costume from the plaza and reverted to her country club uniform, though the edges were visibly frayed. Her posture was stooped. She looked exhausted, her smile tight and trembling as she slid into the leather booth across from me. She carried an oversized, stiff leather handbag. Instead of placing it on the floor or the empty seat beside her, she immediately hoisted it directly onto the table between us. She adjusted it carefully, making sure it was propped up against the salt cellar, angled specifically so the slightly open zipper faced my direction. The dinner began with a masterclass in feigned remorse. Brenda ordered a glass of expensive Pinot Noir, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at me across the pristine white tablecloth. She apologized for the driveway incident. She apologized for Chelsea's relentless entitlement. She even managed to squeeze out an apology for Gregory's sprawling financial crimes, claiming she had been a blind, foolish wife who had trusted the wrong man. She played the tragic reformed matriarch, beautifully speaking in soft, hushed tones, wiping her eyes with a linen napkin. I ate my sea bass in absolute silence, my expression completely blank. I watched her perform, waiting for the inevitable pivot. It happened right before the dessert course was served. Brenda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, intimate whisper. She clasped her hands together tightly, looking at me with wide, deeply understanding eyes. "Valerie." "I know why you did it," she murmured gently, injecting her tone with manufactured maternal warmth. "I know why you set your father up. You were so angry, and you had every right to be angry with us. But Gregory is facing a decade in a federal penitentiary. He is a sick old man. He will not survive that kind of facility. Don't you feel a little guilty for stealing your dad's algorithm code and framing him for those transfers? You can tell me. It's just us here. I am your mother. I will keep your secret." The sheer staggering absurdity of the accusation was almost breathtaking. Gregory was a suburban wealth manager who couldn't write a line of computer code if his life depended on it, but Brenda was desperately throwing corporate buzzwords at the wall. She was hoping to capture audio of me agreeing to any form of espionage or sabotage. She wanted a recorded confession to hand to Gregory's federal defense lawyers. It was a manufactured get-out-of-jail-free card designed to shift the blame from his embezzlement to my alleged corporate framing. I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that caused Brenda's breath to catch in her throat. I did not answer her ridiculous question. Instead, I calmly reached across the table. Before Brenda could even flinch, I plunged my hand straight into the unzipped opening of her leather purse. My fingers immediately closed around a cold rectangular metal device. I pulled it out and set it flat on the table right next to her wine glass. It was a high-grade digital voice recorder. The red light on the top was blinking steadily, silently, capturing every word spoken in our booth. Brenda's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, but only a strangled, pathetic gasp emerged. She stared at the blinking red light as if I had just pulled a live grenade out of her bag. Trying to record a fake confession to save Dad from prison, I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the restaurant with lethal precision. I kept my tone perfectly level, entirely conversational, ensuring the device picked up my absolute lack of guilt. "That is an incredibly amateurish strategy, Brenda. Did Gregory's bargain basement defense attorney suggest this, or did you cook up this federal wiretapping violation all by yourself?" Brenda lunged forward, desperately clawing at the table to grab the recorder. I smoothly slid it out of her reach with one hand. With my other hand, I picked up my own smartphone, which had been resting face down next to my water glass the entire evening. I flipped the screen over. The built-in recording application was running the digital sound waves, tracking my steady voice and her panicked, ragged breathing. I had turned it on the moment I sat down in the booth. "Let's add this to the extortion file," I stated, cleanly tapping the screen of my phone to save the audio file directly to my secure corporate cloud. "The federal prosecutors will be deeply fascinated to hear how you are actively attempting to manufacture false evidence to obstruct an ongoing SEC investigation. Witness tampering and evidence fabrication carry their own mandatory minimum sentences." Brenda dropped the crying act instantly. The terrified, remorseful mother vanished, replaced entirely by a cornered, feral animal. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She realized in a fraction of a second that her manipulation was not just useless, It was a liability that was going to get her indicted alongside her husband. She scrambled out of the leather booth so fast her knees slammed into the heavy oak table, rattling the silverware and nearly spilling her wine. She did not say a single word. She snatched her purse, leaving the digital recorder sitting next to my plate, and practically ran toward the exit. She shoved past the maitre d', fleeing the high-end restaurant in utter disgrace, leaving me to order an espresso and enjoy the remainder of my evening in absolute peace. I enjoyed the remainder of my evening in absolute peace. The espresso was dark rich and completely undisturbed. Brenda's abandoned voice recorder sat on the table like a monument to her stupidity until I handed it to the waiter to throw in the trash. I walked out into the glittering Manhattan night, my mind already shifting to the next phase of the operation. The legal machinery governing foreclosure is notoriously slow, but when it involves federal embezzlement charges, forged asset declarations, and massive commercial fraud, the banks move with terrifying velocity. They wanted their money, and they wanted it immediately. Gregory and Brenda had exactly 21 days to vacate the premises before the property was auctioned off to the highest bidder on the county courthouse steps. The day of the auction dawned gray and bitterly cold. It was fitting weather for the death of an empire built entirely on vanity. From my corner office, I could imagine the scene playing out at the estate. The sprawling colonial mansion that had served as the ultimate symbol of Gregory's fabricated success was now nothing more than a crime scene in the eyes of his furious creditors. I had my security team monitor the property perimeter strictly for corporate liability reasons. The live feed relayed to my tablet painted a picture of absolute, unmitigated defeat. Gregory and Brenda were packing their final boxes. There were no professional movers in crisp uniforms handling their antique furniture or boxing up their crystal chandeliers. The creditors had already tagged and seized anything of substantial value to offset the massive debt. Gregory was dragging taped cardboard boxes out to the driveway himself. The commanding, terrifying patriarch of my childhood was completely gone. He looked frail, his shoulders stooped, wearing faded sweatpants instead of his signature tailored suits. He moved like a ghost haunting his own ruins, his face pale with the reality of his impending federal sentencing. Chelsea was there too. She had apparently taken a break from her cheap roadside motel to witness the final collapse of her childhood sanctuary. The golden child who used to glide through those mahogany halls, dripping in stolen wealth and unearned arrogance, was now sitting on the edge of the driveway, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Her designer clothes were stained, her hair unkempt. She was watching her inheritance get packed into the trunk of a rented sedan. At precisely 10 in the morning, the digital foreclosure auction commenced. It was not a grand, dramatic affair. There was no auctioneer shouting numbers to a crowded room. It was a silent, algorithmic process executed on a banking server. I sat at my desk, sipping sparkling water, watching the numbers tick upward on my secondary monitor. The bank wanted to offload the contaminated asset quickly. They opened the bidding at a fraction of the property's market value, eager to erase Gregory's name from their ledgers and close the disastrous file. A few local real estate flippers placed tentative bids hoping to score a massive discount on a luxury home. They were immediately aggressively outbid. The counterbids were instantaneous and overwhelming, designed to completely discourage any competition. Within 14 minutes, the auction was officially closed. The property was sold. Miles away, standing in the driveway of the house she no longer owned, Brenda received the automated notification from the bank. The email contained the final sale price and the name of the purchasing entity. It also contained a standard legal notice regarding the new owner's intent to file for immediate demolition permits. The grand historic estate was going to be leveled. My personal cell phone buzzed on my desk. It was a text message from Brenda. Even after the restaurant incident, even after I had threatened her with federal wiretapping charges, her bottomless narcissism allowed her to believe she could still extract a favor from me. Her sense of entitlement was a terminal disease that no amount of reality could cure. The message arrived in a frantic block of text. Valerie, you have to answer me right now. The bank just sold the house. They sold it for pennies. Some faceless corporate holding company called Vanguard Enterprises just bought it, and the bank says they are filing permits to bulldoze the entire property. They are going to tear down our home to build a commercial complex. Can you believe this? This is illegal. They cannot just erase our family history. You have lawyers at Apex. You have power. You have to help us sue them to stop the demolition. We can file an injunction. Please, Valerie, do this one thing for your family. We have nothing left. I read the message twice, marveling at the sheer blinding audacity. She was standing in the rubble of a life funded by theft, begging the daughter she had emotionally abused for decades to provide pro bono corporate litigation against a real estate developer. She still thought I was a resource to be tapped. I did not reply immediately. I let the silence stretch for 5 long minutes, letting her panic simmer in that cold driveway. I turned my attention back to the massive mahogany desk in front of me. Spread across the polished wood were the newly finalized architectural blueprints for Vanguard Enterprises. They detailed a state-of-the-art, eco-friendly corporate retreat center. It was a multi-million-dollar development project that would serve as the premier East Coast hub for Apex Global's executive training programs. The blueprints were magnificent. Right where Gregory's imposing dining room used to be, there was a schematic for a glass-walled meditation atrium. Right over Chelsea's luxurious childhood bedroom, the plans called for a paved employee parking structure. The ground where they had constantly mocked my ambitions would soon be covered in fresh asphalt. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard with calm, deliberate precision. I did not write a paragraph. I did not express anger or triumph. I simply stated the cold, undeniable facts of her new reality. I know. I am the CEO of Vanguard Enterprises. Tell Gregory to ensure the driveway is entirely clear of his boxes before my demolition crews arrive on Monday morning. I pressed send. I glanced at the live security feed on my tablet. The high-definition camera captured the exact moment the message was delivered. Brenda was standing near the curb, clutching her phone with both hands, waiting for her savior to respond. I watched her look down at the screen. I watched her entire body go completely rigid. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Her mouth opened in a silent, horrific scream of absolute realization. The ultimate truth finally crashed through her thick armor of delusion. There was no legal loophole. There was no miscommunication. There was no escape. The scapegoat daughter she had spent 30 years grinding into the dirt literally owned the ground she was currently standing on. Her hands went completely limp. The smartphone slipped from her grasp, plummeting downward and shattering against the hard, cold asphalt of my driveway. Monday morning arrived with the biting chill of inevitable consequences. I pulled up to the curb of the estate at precisely 7:30, stepping out of my sleek black town car. I wore a tailored razor-sharp ivory suit that stood in stark contrast to the dreary gray sky. Behind my vehicle, a convoy of heavy yellow machinery rumbled to a halt. The demolition crew had arrived exactly on schedule. I walked up the pavement, my heels clicking rhythmically against the cold stone. Standing on the public sidewalk, huddled together like exiled refugees, were Gregory, Brenda, and Chelsea. They were surrounded by a pathetic barricade of taped cardboard boxes and hastily packed designer luggage. The sprawling colonial mansion loomed behind them for the very last time. The massive yellow excavators rolled past us, their heavy diesel engines vibrating through the soles of my shoes. They crawled up the driveway, positioning their hydraulic steel claws directly in front of the grand double-door entrance. Gregory's face was an ugly mottled purple. He was physically shaking, clutching a box of financial ledgers to his chest. He took a step toward me, his eyes bulging with a mix of terror and absolute unrestrained hatred. "You are a monster," Gregory screamed, his voice cracking violently over the roar of the idling machinery. "You are a cold, calculated monster. You planned this just to humiliate us. You are destroying our home." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked past him, my gaze sweeping over the massive, pretentious structure that had served as the theater for my childhood misery. I looked at the second-floor window of the small drafty room where they used to lock me away during their extravagant summer parties. I remembered sitting at my small desk plugging my ears to block out the thumping music and the clinking of champagne glasses, forcing myself to study while they entertained their wealthy friends. I remembered coming downstairs the next morning only to be told by Brenda that I was too ugly and too socially useless to ever fit into their world. I remembered every cruel joke, every financial threat, every systematic attempt to break my spirit, so I would remain subservient to their delusions of grandeur. The house was not a home. It was a monument to their vanity built on stolen money and my stolen peace. I turned my attention back to the shivering, broken man on the sidewalk. "I am not a monster," I said loudly, my voice slicing clean through the heavy rumble of the bulldozer engines. "I am an urban developer." I raised my right hand and gave a sharp, deliberate nod to the site foreman standing near the lead excavator. He spoke into his radio. The heavy machinery did not just represent progress, it was the physical manifestation of my ultimate liberation. The lead excavator's hydraulic arm reared back the diesel engine, roaring with a deafening intensity. The massive steel claw swung forward, striking the custom mahogany double doors with terrifying, magnificent force. The impact sent a violent tremor through the ground. The expensive wood splintered into jagged matchsticks, instantly exposing the grand foyer where Brenda used to host her pretentious cocktail hours. Another excavator moved in from the side, its claw tearing into the brick facade of the sunroom. Glass shattered in a musical, cascading symphony as the second-floor balcony was violently ripped away from the main structure. Chelsea let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, collapsing onto one of her suitcases as the walls of her childhood bedroom caved in on themselves. Brenda covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably as a thick cloud of gray plaster dust and decades of toxic history billowed into the cold morning air. Gregory just stood there, entirely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing silently as he watched his stolen empire get reduced to a pile of worthless rubble. I stood perfectly still, watching the destruction with profound, untethered satisfaction. When the initial collapse was complete and the machines paused to reposition and clear the debris, I turned back to the three figures on the sidewalk. "You always love to brag about the exclusivity of this neighborhood," I stated, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You love the strict zoning laws that kept the riffraff out, but you failed to pay attention to the municipal planning board meetings over the last 6 months. Vanguard Enterprises applied for a comprehensive rezoning permit for this specific parcel of land. It was officially approved late last week." Gregory stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, rezoned. "What are you talking about?" I smoothed an invisible crease on my ivory blazer. "I am using a fraction of my personal wealth from Apex Global to redevelop this land," I explained calmly. "I am building a state-of-the-art, subsidized housing complex. But it is not just standard affordable housing. It is a highly specialized residential campus designed exclusively for independent college students, specifically students who have been financially cut off, discarded, or abused by toxic narcissistic families." Chelsea looked up from her suitcase, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. "You are building a dorm for poor kids. Right here in our neighborhood." "I am building a sanctuary," I corrected her sharply, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "I am building a foundation for brilliant young people who were told they were useless, ugly, and burdensome. I am giving them the exact security, financial backing, and structural support you spent my entire life trying to deny me. They will live here entirely rent-free while they earn their degrees and build empires of their own. Every single student who lives on this property will be given the resources to succeed precisely because the toxicity has been permanently eradicated from the soil. The architecture will feature open study halls, community gardens, and collaborative workspaces. It will be everything this house never was." Brenda was physically shaking her hands, grasping desperately at her own matted hair in sheer disbelief. "You did all of this just to spite us," she wept, her voice cracking. "You tore down our beautiful historic home to build a neighborhood charity project just to punish your own family." "I did not tear down your home, Brenda," I replied, stepping closer to the curb so she could see the absolute finality in my eyes. You lost your home because you and Gregory are criminals who funded a fantasy life with stolen money. I simply bought the wreckage and decided to plant something beautiful in the dirt. I checked my designer watch, signaling that my allotted time for this interaction had officially expired. The demolition will be completed by tomorrow afternoon, I announced, turning to walk back toward my waiting town car. I strongly suggest you gather your boxes and vacate the public sidewalk. The city sanitation trucks are scheduled to sweep the street in 20 minutes, and they will throw away anything left on the curb. I slid into the plush leather seat of my vehicle, the door shutting solidly behind me. Through the tinted glass, I watched Gregory, Brenda, and Chelsea frantically scrambling to drag their pathetic cardboard boxes away from the approaching street sweeper. Behind them, the bulldozer engines roared back to life, tearing through the remaining pillars of their fabricated reality. The slate was completely wiped clean. Thick clouds of pulverized drywall and splintered mahogany continued to roll across the manicured lawn, drifting over the wrought iron gates and settling like a layer of gray snow onto the pristine public sidewalk. The dust coated the pathetic stack of taped cardboard boxes. It settled into the expensive fabric of Brenda's designer trench coat and layered itself across the scuffed leather of Chelsea's monogrammed luggage. The air tasted of crushed brick, and decades of buried secrets finally exposed to the harsh winter light. For a long moment, the only sounds were the low, rhythmic idling of the massive diesel engines and the structural groans of the dying colonial mansion. Then, amidst the choking dust of their ruined home, Chelsea finally broke. It was not a gradual descent into despair. It was a violent, explosive shattering of a fragile ego that had never once been tested by reality. Her lifelong delusion of inherent superiority collided head-on with the undeniable fact of her absolute ruin, and the resulting shockwave short-circuited her mind entirely. Chelsea stopped crying. She stood up from her suitcase, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in dark, jagged rivers, and her eyes were wide with a manic, unhinged fury. She stared at my tailored ivory suit, my pristine town car, and the fleet of heavy machinery operating under my direct command. "It is not fair," Chelsea shrieked, her voice tearing through the cold morning air, raw and guttural. She took a frantic step toward me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly entitlement. All the years of passive-aggressive smirks and whispered insults had boiled over into feral desperation. "You do not deserve any of this!" she screamed, spittle flying from her lips as she pointed a trembling finger at my chest. I was the smart one. I was the pretty one. I was the one who was supposed to have the empire. That is my money. That is my success. You stole my life. You are a disgusting, bitter loser who got lucky. Give it back to me. Give it back right now." With a primal ear-piercing screech, Chelsea lunged at me. She threw her entire body weight forward, her hands raised like claws aiming directly for my face. She fully intended to physically tear me down to her level, reverting to the same vicious playground bullying she had utilized when we were children. She wanted to draw blood desperately, hoping that inflicting physical pain would somehow reverse the utter devastation of her reality. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not even blink. Before Chelsea could cross the 6 feet of pavement separating us, reality intervened. My private security detail moved with terrifying, effortless precision. 2 men in dark suits stepped seamlessly from the perimeter of the town car, cutting off her trajectory instantly. The lead guard caught Chelsea by her shoulders, absorbing her frantic momentum as if she weighed absolutely nothing. He smoothly redirected her energy, spinning her around and pinning her arms firmly against her sides. Chelsea thrashed violently against his grip, kicking her scuffed designer boots at his shins and thrashing her head side to side. She howled, stringing together incoherent, vile insults, demanding that they let her go so she could claim what was rightfully hers. The security guard did not speak or react to her frantic blows. He simply held her in an unbreakable clinical restraint, waiting silently for my signal. I looked at my struggling, hysterical sister. The golden child, the perfect heir, the standard by which I was constantly judged and found lacking, had been reduced to a screaming, rabid toddler throwing a temper tantrum on a public street. I shifted my gaze to my parents. Gregory was still clutching his box of useless financial ledgers, his jaw hanging open as he watched his favorite daughter completely lose her mind. The illusion of his perfect family was shattering right in front of him, and he was entirely powerless to stop it. He looked small, hollow, and utterly pathetic. Brenda was trembling violently. Her hands were pressed tight against her mouth to stifle her own sobs. She looked from Chelsea's thrashing form to my perfectly composed stance, and the ultimate horror of her situation finally took root in her eyes. She realized that she had bet everything on a hollow vessel and had spent decades deliberately destroying the only child who possessed the actual capacity to build an empire. I stepped closer to the curb, ensuring my voice would carry clearly over Chelsea's frantic screaming and the idling construction equipment. I looked directly into Brenda's terrified, tear-filled eyes, then shifted my gaze to Gregory's pale, defeated face. "You spent 33 years telling me I was a pointless, ugly failure," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, resonant authority. "You isolated me. You locked me in a drafty bedroom and forced me to listen to your lavish parties, reminding me every single day that I was inadequate. You told me I was useless because I did not fit your superficial, shallow definition of success." I paused, letting the immense weight of my words settle over them like a heavy shroud. "But you forgot one thing," I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal quiet intensity. "While you were busy admiring yourselves in the mirror, while you were obsessing over country club memberships and designer labels, I was learning exactly how the world works. I studied the ledgers you ignored. I analyzed the systems you exploited. I built a foundation of actual tangible power while you financed a fantasy." Chelsea let out another exhausted, ragged scream, but her struggles were growing weaker against the guard's iron grip. "You built a house of cards," I stated with absolute unwavering finality. "I just blew on it." I did not wait for a response. I did not need an apology, a justification, or a pathetic plea for forgiveness. Their stunned silence was the only closure I required. I gave a brief nod to my security team to release my sister, knowing the fight had completely left her body. I turned my back on them. As I pivoted toward my waiting vehicle, I heard a sharp gasp followed by the heavy sound of fabric hitting concrete. Brenda had finally collapsed. The matriarch of the Wilson family fell to her knees on the dust-covered sidewalk, her hands clutching her chest as she bowed her head in total, unconditional defeat. The staggering weight of her own arrogant, catastrophic miscalculations had physically driven her to the ground. I walked smoothly toward the town car, my posture immaculate. I did not look back. I did not spare a single glance for the weeping mother, the paralyzed father, or the hysterical sister, who were now just strangers fading in my rearview mirror. There were no tears in my eyes. There was no lingering anger or sorrow in my heart. The heavy armored door of my vehicle closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me inside a quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary. Through the tinted window, I watched the lead excavator raise its massive steel claw one more time. The hydraulic gears whined with mechanical anticipation before bringing the heavy arm crashing down into the center of the mansion's main staircase. The remaining structural beams snapped like dry twigs. The roof caved inward, sending a massive plume of dust high into the cold winter sky. As my driver pulled smoothly away from the curb and merged into the morning traffic, the last thing I heard was the deafening, glorious sound of the bulldozer erasing my painful history forever. The dust from the demolition had not even settled over the suburb before my legal team began erecting an entirely different kind of wall. The physical destruction of the house was merely the symbolic end of the Wilson family. The actual permanent eradication of their influence from my life required the clinical surgical precision of corporate attorneys. Over the following weeks, the legal machinery moved with devastating efficiency. I sat at the head of the conference table in my Manhattan office, reviewing the final injunctions. We did not simply file for standard restraining orders. My legal team secured impenetrable lifetime orders of protection against Gregory, Brenda, Chelsea, and even Marcus. The terms were suffocatingly strict. They were legally barred from coming within 500 yards of my person, my residence, any Apex Global property, or any subsidiary holding company under my control. Any attempt to contact me via phone, email, third-party proxy, or even social media would trigger an immediate mandatory arrest. The digital and physical boundaries were absolute. I had successfully turned my family into legal untouchables. Gregory's downfall was perhaps the most spectacular, stripped of the unearned authority he had wielded like a weapon for 3 decades. Facing a mountain of irrefutable digital evidence and the terrifying reality of a decade in a federal penitentiary, his arrogance completely evaporated. He took a plea deal. It was a humiliating, groveling surrender. In exchange for avoiding a prison cell, Gregory was forced to liquidate his remaining hidden assets to pay restitution and accept a lifetime irrevocable ban from the financial sector. He was permanently stripped of his licenses, his reputation, and his livelihood. The man who had once terrified me with a single glance from across a mahogany dining table was now working the night shift at a municipal toll booth on the interstate. He spent his nights sitting in a cramped fiberglass box under harsh fluorescent lights, breathing in diesel exhaust, and handing back quarters to weary truck drivers. There were no country club dinners. There were no sycophantic clients to bully. There was only the endless, mind-numbing repetition of traffic, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of his own failure. Chelsea's descent was equally poetic. Her entire identity had been constructed around the illusion of inherited wealth and her status as the untouchable golden child. When the Wilson name transitioned from a country club asset to a toxic liability, her husband reacted with the exact self-serving ruthlessness they had taught him. Marcus filed for divorce the moment the federal indictments went public. He served Chelsea with a mountain of aggressive lawsuits, systematically protecting his own remaining assets and leaving her to drown in the legal crossfire. Without Gregory's stolen money to fund her lifestyle, Chelsea discovered the harsh reality of her own incompetence. She possessed no actual skills, no work ethic, and an attitude of profound entitlement that made her entirely unemployable. Even the luxury boutiques where she used to drop thousands of dollars a week refused to hire her as a sales associate. With nowhere else to go, the golden child was forced to move into a cramped, depressing studio apartment with Brenda. It was located in a grim, aging building on the outskirts of the city, complete with peeling linoleum floors and a persistent smell of cheap cooking oil. The poetic justice of their living arrangement was flawless. The two women who had spent my entire life colluding against me were now trapped in a tiny, suffocating box together. Deprived of their audience, their wealth, and their primary scapegoat, their shared narcissism turned inward. My security team, monitoring the periphery to ensure compliance with the restraining orders, reported that Brenda and Chelsea spent their days engaged in vicious, screaming arguments. They constantly blamed each other for their catastrophic downfall. Brenda blamed Chelsea for her reckless spending, while Chelsea blamed Brenda for failing to secure the hidden college funds. They were locked in a miserable, endless cycle of mutual resentment, drowning in the bitter realization that they had engineered their own ruin. While they festered in their self-made purgatory, I systematically erased my existence from their world. I instructed my corporate security division to execute a comprehensive digital scrub. They aggressively wiped my new private address, my unlisted phone numbers, and any identifying personal data from all public databases and data broker registries. My residence was purchased through an anonymous shell company, shielded by layers of non-disclosure agreements and impenetrable corporate veils. I was completely legally and physically untouchable. If Brenda or Chelsea ever managed to scrape together enough change to hire a cheap private investigator, they would find absolutely nothing. I was a ghost to them. The toxicity that had poisoned my childhood, the relentless belittling, the financial manipulation, and the psychological abuse had been surgically excised from my life. I had not simply survived their cruelty. I had outgrown it, dismantled it, and paved over the wreckage. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office, looking out at the glittering, sprawling expanse of the city below. The frantic, desperate noise of the Wilson family was entirely gone, replaced by the steady, productive hum of my own success. I had built a fortune based on genuine competence and unyielding determination. I had created a sanctuary for those who had been similarly discarded. I stood in the quiet, pristine air of my reality, taking a slow, deep breath. There were no strings attached. There were no shadows waiting in the corners. I was entirely free. 6 months later, the physical manifestation of that freedom stood towering against the clear blue sky. The air was crisp and warm, carrying the faint sweet scent of freshly planted jasmine and cedar. Where the oppressive, suffocating walls of the Wilson family mansion once cast long, dark shadows, a stunning marvel of modern architecture now captured the sunlight. The Vanguard Sanctuary was officially complete. It was a masterpiece of glass steel and sustainable design, purposefully built to represent everything my childhood home was not. There were no closed-off drafty rooms meant for isolation. Instead, the complex featured sweeping open-concept study halls, collaborative workspaces flooded with natural light, and sprawling community gardens designed to foster connection and growth. I stood precisely in the geographic airspace where my small, drafty childhood bedroom used to be. The space that once held my silent misery was now a state-of-the-art technology lab, humming with the sound of servers and focused collaboration. It was a complete architectural and emotional overwrite. I walked through the bustling central atrium, the pristine marble floors clicking beneath my heels. Today was the official ribbon-cutting ceremony, and the energy in the building was electric. I was entirely surrounded by the first cohort of residents, 50 brilliant, driven, and ambitious young women who had been selected for the sanctuary program. They were engineering majors, aspiring architects, and future entrepreneurs. They were also survivors. Like me, they had walked away from toxic environments, narcissistic families, and financial abuse. I watched a group of them gathered around a drafting table in the communal library, laughing freely as they debated a design project. There was no fear in their eyes. There was no shrinking themselves to appease fragile egos. They were receiving the exact kind of comprehensive financial backing, psychological support, and unwavering mentorship that Gregory and Brenda had spent my entire life actively denying me. I was giving them the ultimate luxury I had to fight tooth and nail to secure for myself the absolute safety to reach their maximum potential. A distinguished man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped up beside me, handing me a crystal flute of champagne. It was Victor, the chief executive officer of Apex Global. He had flown in specifically for the inauguration, not as my boss, but as an invested peer. He looked up at the towering glass atrium and then turned to me, a smile of profound respect crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You did not just build a housing complex," Valerie Victor said, his voice carrying a tone of deep admiration. "You engineered an entirely new paradigm. The board is thoroughly impressed not just with your financial returns this quarter, but with your unparalleled vision for human capital. You took a wasteland and turned it into an empire. Cheers to your absolute brilliance." I clinked my glass against his, the crystal ringing with a clear, triumphant note. "Thank you, Victor. But this is merely the foundation. We are just getting started." As Victor stepped away to greet the board of directors, I walked over to the edge of the rooftop terrace. The elevation offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the city skyline, the towering skyscrapers glittering like diamonds in the afternoon sun. I set my champagne flute on the glass railing and slid my smartphone from the pocket of my ivory blazer. I tapped the screen, illuminating my notifications. I stared at the pristine digital quiet of my inbox. There were zero frantic voicemails demanding financial bailouts. There were zero passive-aggressive text messages dripping with manipulation. There were zero legal threats, zero fake emergencies, and zero manufactured drama. My corporate security team had executed their mandate flawlessly. My new private address, my unlisted numbers, and my digital footprint remained entirely scrubbed from the public domain. The lifetime restraining orders stood as impenetrable legal fortresses. Gregory, Brenda, Chelsea, and Marcus were completely locked out of my universe. I did not know if Gregory was currently sweating in his toll booth or if Chelsea and Brenda were tearing each other apart in their cramped, miserable studio apartment. For the first time in my entire life, I realized I did not know, and I absolutely did not care. A profound, untethered peace washed over me. The burning, urgent need for vengeance that had fueled my initial takeover had completely evaporated. I had spent years meticulously plotting their downfall, analyzing their weaknesses, and engineering their financial ruin. I had shattered their delusions and leveled their empire to the dirt. But looking out over the thriving sanctuary I had built in its place, I understood the ultimate truth about retribution. The greatest revenge was not simply destroying my abusers. The true victory was flourishing so spectacularly, so undeniably, that they became entirely irrelevant. They were no longer the villains in my story. They were simply redacted footnotes in a history I had already rewritten. They were trapped in the miserable, suffocating reality of their own incompetence while I owned the skyline. The toxicity had been surgically excised, leaving behind nothing but clean, fertile soil for my future. I breathed in the crisp air, turning my gaze away from the horizon and directly toward the camera. You do not owe your abusers anything, especially not your future. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you? Let me know in the comments below.